Yeah. So narcissism, I really see it as having all the ingredients. It is someone who is, they have a level of entitlement, need for envy, or believing other people envy them. There's a really superficialness to them. They believe they're more special than other people, that
Right.
their needs are above anyone else's, and that um, they have a really poor, or I say low empathy. I think that's a huge distinction. Um, they're not antisocial. They know what is good and bad. That's why they're able to be performative. Narcissistic people are very socially perceptive. So they have that cognitive empathy intact. They know to ask the questions, and they can be empathetic in short sprints. That's why, the people will say, I met so and so in like the first 6 to 8 months, they were Mr. or Mrs. Wonderful. They were very attuned to me. They ask all the questions, and I felt so seen. And as soon as like that kind of they know like they can show it's usually after the first I love yous are said is when they start slowly, I call it upping the notch a little bit, and they make you more adaptive to this environment. It's not, an overnight thing where they're raging at you or they're abusing you the next night. It's usually small stuff, and they slowly increment it up and test your boundaries. And so I tell people narcissism is not just someone who is just entitled or is just, grandiose. It is someone who has all of these things, right? It's like if someone came and said, I brought you an apple pie, but it was really an apple, you wouldn't say thanks for the apple pie. You would say thanks for the apple. So, if you added all of the sugar, flour, and you mix it up, you would have apple pie, right? It's the same thing, and it's pervasive. So these are people who are it's in most or all situations they are like this. So it's not just someone having a bad day or someone didn't sleep well or they got bad news. This is someone who on a regular basis exhibits these characteristics. And that's why I say like they're very socially perceptive. Like they're able to read the room. They know being a jerk and being, a toddler in public is probably not a good look. So that's why they save everything behind closed doors. That's why they're able to get away with a lot of this stuff. And that's why a lot of people who abuse their children, they look like fantastic people to the outside. They're your community leader, they're your teacher, they're the neighborhood's religious leader. And so it buys them that credibility that they need, that they are a good person.
Mm, mhm.
And so that's how I really explain it. And there's a difference between narcissism and narcissistic. Like I have a personality style, you have a personality style. If you got to know me, you'd probably be like, well, David is agreeable with a mixture of conscientiousness and maybe a little neuroticism. And that's David.
Right.
That's not changing. And so, like, they have a personality style as well. I think really NPD is not terribly helpful. I think the diagnosis NPD sometimes really misses the mark on what narcissism actually is and how it presents. And the statistics we have on it are really not that great because, again, it's a lack of awareness. You're not going to have someone who shows up to a therapist's office and do some trial. Usually the reason why they're in therapy is that their life is in flames. They lost their partner, their kids aren't talking to them, they lost their job, and they're like, okay, like, are they given some ultimatum that like they're not there out of because they're wanting to actually grow and be better people.
Yeah.
They're the ones who are usually putting others into therapy. That's what.
Yeah, yeah. No, I appreciate your explanation, and a good point that I thought that you made was like it's not just like having a bad day. It's a pervasive thing. And so it's not like somebody lost their job and they're having a really bad year and they're just, acting in ways that might resemble NPD traits. This is something that's been going on for a long time, but also the other important nuance is that, they do, like you said, represent themselves as, the community leaders, and, they're aware of what's right and what's wrong. And so I think that that's a really good way to explain that. I'm going to go ahead and just give for listeners the DSM-5 definition of narcissistic personality disorder. This is the diagnostic criteria that clinicians in the United States use to diagnose this personality disorder. And according to the DSM of empathy, beginning by early adulthood and present in various contexts. So it is classified as a cluster B personality disorder, and that's along with BPD and histrionic personality disorder. So that's more of like the very cut dry, clinical term, but we're really kind of getting into some of the nitty gritty of what narcissism can look like, and particularly growing up in narcissistic families. So I guess, to start out, when we say narcissistic family system, it's, what does that actually look like in real life? And so I'm curious what your perspective is on that.
Yeah. So a narcissistic family, it's a very authoritarian family. It is do as I say, don't talk back to me, don't have a voice. Your needs don't matter. You follow me. If I'm having a bad day, then you're having a bad day. That's don't outshine, don't be great, but don't be so great that you outshine me. And it's children who grow up in narcissistic families really come out of it with complex trauma. I don't see people who are exposed to narcissism, how they do not develop complex trauma, because especially as children, like, you are fully dependent upon another caregiver who's saying you don't matter, essentially. My needs come before you. And so the child can't develop, as themselves. They have to fragment. There's a lot of fragmentation they experience of being the inner critic or being the perfectionist or having that inner bully, and all of that's protecting against this threat that they can't escape. Because I often compare people who are in these families as often being raised as a hostage, that you're dependent it's being dependent upon them. So it's being dependent upon someone who hurts you and you can't leave. Like a child can't, let me go to the nearest bus station and go to the next family. There's none of that. A child can't do that. So they have to conform, whether they like it or not. And that's why children who grow into adults, they have this overwhelming sense of powerlessness. They feel like maybe other people might be bigger than them, or they shrink themselves. They have a lot of trouble making decisions. They don't know who they are. There's a really loss of identity. And so that is what having a usually it's one parent is narcissistic, and the other one tends to be more passive. And
Thing.
they in a way, I don't know if you looked at Jennifer Fried's work, but when you have a narcissistic partner, there's a certain level of portrayal blindness that happens, right? You kind of whoosh it away, as what it's called. Like, they might cheat on you, but then you just kind of poof, make it go away, and like it's like as it never happens. You totally forget about it. And you do that because you're dependent upon a system, and it's your brain's natural way of still being in the system. Because attachment is so important to us as species, as humans. I would say attachment is even more important to people, because no other species do you see is dependent upon their caregivers for over 18 years, right? And so attachment is such a defining characteristic of mammals, but as what people, we are hardwired to be in connection to other people.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that is just such a good point, having one family member or one parent potentially being more passive and then the other one being narcissistic. That's something that I've seen throughout research as well. And one other thing, that is a good point to make is that that's why oftentimes a lot of people that come out of narcissistic families, from what I've seen, it's hard to trust themselves. And a
Yeah.
lot of times they were validated for what they could do for their caregiver, right? So like having a bad day. And again, this isn't a diagnostic criteria of a narcissistic parent, but this is just what I've seen consistently throughout people who have experienced this type of trauma growing up is that they were validated for doing good for their parents. So instead of learning how to like trust and understand themselves, they learned how to survive by what I can do for other people to make sure they know that I like them, make sure they like me, make sure that I'm being good for lack of a better word. Have you seen that as well?
Yes, that fawn response, I think, which is what you're describing, that it's the fourth F that's been, it's kind of the last stage before you go into shutdown and collapse. And it's, I can't escape. I can't outfight this person and and freezing is not working. So I am going to appease my abuser because if they are happy, I'm less likely to be harmed. And so it is, no, it's not talking back. It's not setting boundaries. It is not sharing your opinion, kind of just going with the flow. It's like almost being, the cool girl, the one who has no boundaries, the one who it doesn't cause any problems. It's, kind of the go with the flow type of person. And so, I think that's what your
Yeah,
response.
exactly. And that's why I have this whole retired good girls club because we're trying to kind of beat that narrative that I feel like a lot of women already have placed on them, but especially growing up in these narcissistic family structures, it's a lot more pronounced. How do roles like the golden child and scapegoat impact someone later in life?
Yeah. So, um, there's the golden child and then there's the scapegoat. And Uh, these are roles that are more subconsciously assigned to the child, but usually the golden child is someone who resembles their parents, whether that is personality wise, whether that is appearance wise. They are the achiever, they're the one getting the good grades, they're the star athlete, they make the parent look good. The scapegoat is usually the one who sometimes, like, you'll see like in a co-parent situation, if they resemble the other parents, the narcissistic parent will devalue that because they're reminding of their partner that left them, or you might hear that you look just like your father, you look just like their mother, and it's kind of like that backhanded, compliment. It's like, well, what about it?
Absolutely.
And I think for the golden child, they tend to, fall more susceptible of developing narcissism than the scapegoat. I think the scapegoat, there's a chance for them to really heal because the system's not benefiting them. The golden child, they're being told, not you're special, but you're more special than all of these other people, that you are better than all of these other people. And so if you're receiving that on a daily basis, like, of course you're gonna have this pompous attitude of, like, I don't have to wait in a line. Like, who do you think you are? Don't you know who I am? And so there's that, but also being the golden child can be very destabilizing because if that child does, have that temperament, which is, if people don't know, that's kind of the biological component baked into someone. If someone's temperament tends to be more relaxed, more empathic, it can also have them deal with a lot of shame and a lot of grief that their parents didn't see them, that they were seen for what they could do, not, they're not being celebrated for their emotions, they're being celebrated for their achievements. And so, and also that, like, their other siblings aren't getting the same treatment, right? And so it's like, well, why are you treating my other sibling so poorly, but you're treating me so, and it also creates this dynamic between this division, because division and people makes it easier to control them. And we see this in cults, we see this in leadership and politics. When you divide people, you're able to control them better because they're not um you create a common enemy almost. For the scapegoat, they they're of I say dissociation, more dissociation you would see because they were getting the brunt of all of the, you're the problem of the family, you're the storage. unit of shame for this family. And so they might struggle a little bit more with dissociation, with emotional dysregulation, having a negative self image about themselves that I am bad. Not that what they did to me is bad, but something about me is bad. And that's what we call toxic shame, belief that something fundamentally is wrong or broken about you, and have that disorganized attachment of people who have complex trauma. The vast majority of time they develop disorganized attachment, also known as fearful avoidance, because it's, I call it as never knowing the hand that reaches out to you, if it's going to embrace you or if it's going to hit you. And that instability is very unsettling, especially for children. Children's brains crave structure. And so when they don't get that, their brain has to adapt to that. And so they develop this hot and cold avoidance of anxiousness to be close to the caregivers and really survive. And so I think the scapegoat might have a little bit more difficulties in relationships. They might, I don't necessarily think because you're abused, you're more prone to entering abusive relationships, but you're more prone at getting stuck because you already have that trauma bonded experience. You already have, that structure set up in you. And so someone kind of just, picks it back up where the other person left off.